Hey, deserving listeners, let's continue watching Tom and Tom from Vanderpump Rules being interviewed on the Viall Files podcast. Let's watch.
On the person?
Do you think you should be? Are you ready to protect someone's heart?
Am I ready to protect somebody's heart? Yes, of course I am. I don't know what to say except that, I fucked up and I know that I did that.
We're going to see if it is true that he has indeed grown and changed and that he is now a new person, someone that wouldn't do that again. Because we know he did it with Ariana 9 years prior. And cheating is fairly common, unfortunately. But, when we do research about the prevalence of infidelity, it can be really hard to nail down because you're asking people to self-report. And what do you define as infidelity? I mean, there's a wide range of things. But the kind of infidelity that he engaged in, my take on the research and just anecdotally, it is particular. It's one thing to cheat at the end of a relationship and then wake up the next day and say, okay, something's got to give here. I need to figure out what's going on. Then you break up and you never tell your previous partner that you did cheat on someone else at the end of that relationship. That's more common. But what he did was just have a full-on long-term girlfriend while he was living with Ariana. I say this because to do it right in front of her, of Ariana, and all the friends, and Raquel is right there with Ariana, that takes something, right? That says something. Now, what people will say is, oh, he must be a psychopath or a sociopath, or he must have narcissistic personality disorder. I don't see strong indications of that. He could. Obviously, I can't know from watching a show, but my previous very tentative hypothesis that I would pursue if someone like him were a client was passive-aggressive personality. And it's a complicated personality disorder, and it's not easily understood by its title. The gist of it is that the individual, when they were very young, were abused and had to suppress their anger, but their anger is still there. They also had to divorce themselves from their own feelings and needs, and they were in this perpetual experience of being blamed and harmed unfairly. And they're very angry about it, but through trial and error, they learned they cannot express their assertiveness or their anger or even their displeasure directly because that would cause more abuse. I don't know if that's what he went through, but I'm just telling you the common breeding ground for this personality. And what that does is the individual needs to express themselves somehow. For some people, they will just submerge their anger entirely, but for passive-aggressive people, they will find passive-aggressive means of expressing their needs, of expressing their anger. And passive-aggressive is another term for hidden hostility or hidden anger. And the hidden anger will even kind of be hidden to the individual. They will feel this urge to do things. Sometimes they know they're doing it against, like when he was cheating, if he does have some of this personality, then it's possible that he knew, well, if she's going to treat me like that, then I'm going to call Raquel or I'm going to hang out with Raquel. There could have been some consciousness too, but it often is subconscious. There's just this natural motivation and movement, and the individual isn't making that connection. They just feel like it's the right thing to do, to be with Raquel. It's satisfying something in them, but they don't know what it is. They might interpret it as falling in love, but actually what it is, or at least in part, is that they're able to express an anger that they aren't allowed to express. Now, Ariana probably would have been okay if he would have asserted himself, but because of his childhood, and I don't know, but with him, but for people with this disorder, they assume, and they are very black and white about this, that they cannot, and it's unconscious, it's not a conscious thought, they cannot assert themselves with anybody because everybody to them as a child were their caregivers or even just one parent. And so they just generalize that dynamic with everyone, and it becomes neurological, right? And they also get really good at evading being in trouble because they needed to be when they were young. And by the way, being late, so apparently Sandoval and Nick had a bit of a relationship prior to him coming on the show. They had met at, it sounded like some kind of a camp or something, I'm not sure, but they knew each other and bonded to some extent. And Nick asked Sandoval to come on the podcast. And Sandoval seemed to kind of resist, but eventually agreed. And I think Sandoval probably knows, because I think Nick has said negative things about Sandoval in other episodes. You know, Nick can, at least even in this episode, he can be pretty firm in his statements against people that he might even be interviewing, you know. He's not afraid to just say, hey, I think that was wrong, or I think there's something wrong with you. I mean, not directly, but he's not afraid to say. So it could have been, just hypothesizing, if Sandoval does have some elements of this personality, then he knows that he's heading into the lion's den, and instead of just saying, hey, I can't come on your podcast if you're going to confront me about this because it'll hurt my feelings, or I don't want to get into it, or I want to put that in the past, whatever. We could imagine, reasonably, someone in Sandoval's shoes would want to say that. But because of the history, there is this assumption that you cannot assert yourself directly. You can't express displeasure or your needs directly to someone because you will be harmed. So you have to avoid that. But you can express the hostility and assertiveness in another way, passively or hidden, which is to not show up, right? And then eventually, with all the calls and the texts and everything, it was apparent maybe to him, like, I can't avoid, I've got to go. Or he planned subconsciously on being late because he wanted to get a pre-dig on Nick for future transgressions that he was thinking that were going to happen. You know, this is a lot of psychobabble. It's a lot of speculation, of course. It's all speculation.
Are you ready to protect someone's heart?
Am I ready to protect somebody's heart? Yes, of course I am. I don't know what to say except that, like, I fucked up and I know that I did that.
Okay, so I'll stop yammering, but I just want to remind ourselves of what he said. I don't know what to say. Okay, why? There's a lot of things that someone could say if they felt remorse and had self-reflected and had taken the time to think about it. But when people have these kinds of traumas, there's a twisted web in their brain that prevents them from actually looking at things. And if they do look at it, they don't see the same things. So, you know, because if it is passive aggression, the individual cannot step out of the mode and the belief that whenever anything is going wrong in their life, it must be because some tyrant is doing something to them, because that's what it was like when they were young. And when they were young, they were being blamed for everything emotionally, right? And they knew that that wasn't right, you know, but they did what they could to survive. So then later on, when someone is saying, hey, you're late, or hey, you cheated on me, it all gets filtered through that. So, well, I know I didn't do anything wrong, and I know you're a tyrant, so I'll say what I need to say to get out from underneath of this, and I'll move on with my life. And it's a childish way of seeing things. A lot of personality disorders have very primordial methods of thinking that were set in stone. Well, not set in stone, but the individual is prevented from maturing and developing more nuanced, differentiated, mature ways of seeing the world and their behavior. So anyway, he says, I don't know what to say. Well, what do you say?
Say except that, like, I fucked up and I know that I did that.
I fucked up and I know that I did that. That's very much in line with what he was saying before regarding that he is going through the motions of taking responsibility. Well, of course you know you did it. You don't have some break from reality, you know?
It doesn't matter the scenario. It doesn't matter. I fucked up.
Okay, so that's good to some extent. He's saying it doesn't matter the situation. I think he is either resisting the urge to provide what he believes to be context, but what we might say is blaming others or excusing yourself. So he says, it doesn't matter the context, I fucked up. I will say that his demeanor here seems to be a little bit more acknowledging than before, but we'll see if he can go further.
And I know that. I do love hard. I really do.
All right. Yeah. Now, I want to be clear. If he were a client, I wouldn't be even really operating emotionally from this place. You know, you hear a lot of interesting things as a therapist. You know, everyone has their denials and their excuses, and it's not my job as a therapist to blast people for that or hold them accountable. That's not what they're there for. But anyway, as a therapist, I'm in a different mode. As a citizen, when I watch this, provokes that emotion in me of well, what emotion is it? Disgust? So after blandly saying, I don't know what to say, but I did that thing. Okay, that's acknowledging reality. He's exhibiting a little bit of remorseful tone, but it's hard to know. Could just be him trying to present in a certain way. And then very quickly, he goes into the excuse of, I love hard. One, it doesn't have anything to do with it. Fine, you love intensely. Most people do. Two, you said you loved Ariana. So what about that love? Three, it has nothing to do with having an affair and lying and lying and lying and lying and lying. And yeah, and then they get caught. It's, you know, they talked about how they had these plans that they were going to tell Ariana, but given the fact that it had been months, and given the fact that we've seen a lot of evidence that the two of them would lie to others about a lot of things, and I think lie to themselves, I wouldn't put a lot of money down on an alternate universe in which they weren't caught having the affair, and they did eventually reveal it. You know, you loved hard. Okay, that's most people do.
I do love hard. I really do. And unfortunately, being vulnerable in a situation like got me to throw, you know, logic and everything out the window and people's feelings and Ariana's feelings, you know, and I regret it.
Okay, that's better. It is, from my memory. And he at least is giving words to Ariana's feelings. And he's not as flippant as he was before. So, okay. Yeah, it's good, I think.
You know, logic and everything out the window and people's feelings and Ariana's feelings, you know, and I regret it. Hardcore. I really do. I can't do anything about it.
Then he says, I can't do anything about it. And yeah, he's still saying a lot of the things that people will say when they're trying to avoid responsibility or they don't think that they actually did anything wrong. If you really understood, and we can use this as a jumping off point for ourselves, what we pay attention to, what we should be getting from other people when they do things like this to us, is if you really understand what you did and the effect it had on other people, which is the key, then you wouldn't necessarily say, I don't know what to say about it and I can't do anything about it. At least I wouldn't. Those aren't phrases that I would say, especially in the opening preamble. Now, maybe there isn't anything you can do. You can't erase the past. You can't go back in time. But there's a lot of things that he could do. He could, if Ariana would meet up with him, he could talk at her for 3 hours about how much he knows what he did was hurtful. And he could talk for a long, or listen to her about how it affected her and show and internalize it, but show that he cares. Now, maybe Ariana wouldn't want him to do that, but that's one thing. He could also just publicly say things that might get around to Ariana and everyone else that he lied to. He could write a song about it There's a lot of things one can do to say there's nothing you can do about it. That's what you say, like, look, there's nothing we can do about it. Like, it's water under the bridge. Like, forget it.
Except just try to.
We can learn from it.
Yes, exactly. I've learned so much.
Like what?
Yeah. So Nick asks, he will ask good questions. And he's seeing through the BS, or at least holding him to his statements. And he says, have you learned from it? Yes, I've learned. Okay, what have you learned? All right, so let's see what he says.
What?
Like what?
Yeah.
For instance, to take a page out of Katie's book, like with Schwartz, like Ariana was, she was like, she was like, I don't know what my life will be without, all this stuff. And like, I should have, I don't know, man. I don't know, dude.
So for you Vanderpump fans, you probably know what he's referring to. I don't. With Katie, is he saying that he should have gone to Ariana earlier and tried to make the relationship better, or what is he saying?
I'm just trying to be a better person. I swear to God, like I really am.
Yeah. So deflection. Nick asks, have you learned anything? And he says, yeah, of course, I've learned so much. Nick says, like what? He proceeds to say this kind of weird story about Katie, and then he says, I don't know, man. So he's trying to deflect. I don't think he has learned anything. And I want to be clear. I'm not blaming him. Well, no one else is to blame other than him, I suppose. But people don't act like this because they want to, I guess is the thing I'll say. They do it because of trauma and the defenses they built, the defensive structure that they needed to create and needed to rely on subconsciously as a young child, that made it so that they could survive their entire childhood and maybe later in life too. So I'm not saying that he is like manipulating anybody or he knows what he's doing. Right from the outside, it looks like he's deflecting, he's obscuring, he's trying to get out from underneath it. He's not really apologizing. He's not really taking responsibility. Because if, you really cared and really saw what you did, well, not even really. If you 10% felt sorry and 10% saw what you did, you would spend a shit ton of time trying to figure out why that happened, at the very least for your own benefit, right? So that you don't have the consequences again. And at best, so that you don't harm other people. And there would be at least a couple bullet points after a year. And, the affair happened even further back, right? And he's been cheating for a long time, right? Back to the beginning of Ariana and his relationship. So you'd think there'd be a couple, even if they were very lackluster bullet points, but you'd think you'd have a couple bullet points. He doesn't. He's like, I don't know, man. I'm just trying to live a good life. Okay, but what did you learn? There's something about you that resulted in this happening twice, if not more times. And they weren't these accidents that happened. They were long-standing behaviors that, several behaviors and a set of behaviors that went on for a long time that destroyed your life and others. You would think you would want to know, what is it about me? The fact that he's not even saying that, I think points to that he has a very robust defensive structure that actually is in place to prevent him from even beginning the process of self-reflection. And I've seen this before. All clinicians have. There's reasons for this. It's a secondary effect of something that helped them when they were growing up. One angle of looking at it, and it's complicated, is that as a child, if you were being abused, and I don't know if he was, but for people with passive-aggressive personality and people that have this personality issue that very much prevents them from effectively having self-reflection and any insight, that often their childhood is, they're being abused, mistreated, and they are going through their day, and there are question marks emerging very frequently. What's happening to me? why is this happening to me? Am I a good person? Or am I really a piece of crap, like the way I'm being treated? Are my parents bad people? Am I safe? Will I ever be safe? Am I to blame? These are major questions. And, there are a lot of questions sort of in that camp. The child has no guidance because they don't have a therapist. There's not someone there to help them with it. And they're a child. They're 4 years old. They don't have sophisticated ways of evaluating this. So apparently, for us humans, we have a mechanism that just shuts the whole thing down, that just says, does not compute, and the implications of the possible answers are so painful and so scary, it's better that I don't even ask the questions. But to try to not ask a question in your mind is harder if the questions emerge for you. So even a more effective defensive strategy is that the questions just never even emerge. And the way that the questions don't emerge, because they're down there, is that you just have this thick layer of concrete that is burying everything. And whenever anyone starts to chip away at that concrete, your ego comes along and just figures out a way to distract, figures out a way to not have that happen. Because when the child was 4, 7, 12, occasionally there would be a break in that defense, and they would start asking questions, or people would start asking questions of them. Maybe even even therapists can bring, and this is something that you deal with as a therapist. You are talking with someone, a child or someone, and you start asking questions along those lines of just like, well, what happened to you? How did you feel? How do you feel right now? That will cause the individual to start to chip away at it, and they learned that cannot happen, because if they have to go down there, very bad answers are down there. And not just answers, but the world will be flipped on its head, and I'll have to reckon with the fact that I am worthless and I am unsafe and I deserved it and my parents hate me, and I don't want to face that for obvious reasons. So they're operating on that all the time. And so when something like this happens, they cheat, and they're being asked, or even internally having moments of like, what's going on with me? That concrete layer is there, so it's hard to get down there, even if they had enough time to try. But there's all these mechanisms to push people off the concrete. Deflection, keep moving forward, distraction, alcohol.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. Like, what have I learned? What have I learned? To not ever do that again. To not ever be in a 9-year fucking relationship and end it that way. To not ever like cheat that way. Like, dude, I'm never gonna do that.
What do you mean
That's
cheat?
never gonna happen
What do
again.
you mean cheat?
So I'm glad he's saying at least that, but it doesn't really say much. It just says that he has enough intelligence to recognize a very obvious fact. So now Nick is asking a good question. Let's see what he says here.
What do you mean? Like,
Well, when you say cheat that way, it
Like cheat at all?
It, it implies that you might
to
cheat
have an
differently.
affair. To
Okay.
have an affair.
I'm just clarifying.
That's good. That clarification was good, actually.
Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. And I don't think that he was saying plans, or that the lesson he learned was to cheat in a better way. I don't think he was saying that. I think he was actually saying, and I believe it. I believe that he has a plan that he will not cheat again. I'm guessing he believed that the first incident that we know about 10 years ago or whatever. It's not typical that people will cheat and afterwards say like, "Oh, yeah, that was fun. Let's wait to do that again. That'll be a fun time." Most people, okay, don't ever do that again. And a lot of people do this, where they will engage in a pattern of behavior, and then after they're caught or there's consequences and the dust settles, they resolve, okay, I'm never going to do that again. But if it's personality based, until you work on your personality and recover from the traumas and rework your defenses and have pretty robust systems in place, like if he does have the personality disorder that I am speculating he might have, which I don't know, even if he were aware of it and he was in recovery and he started to have corrective experiences about expressing his anger, he would still always have the tendency to go down that road. So there have to be all these workarounds. One is to stay in therapy and to be open with your therapist about what you're doing and what you're thinking, So at the very least, you can hear yourself saying things, go, oh, that must be that thing. Or the therapist will say, it's like, actually, that kind of sounds like that thing from before. So that's one thing. Another thing is to predict that the next relationship that he's in, there will come a time when he will be called upon to assert himself and feel anger, not to be angry at, but to feel like, hey, that was an injustice. I'm angry about that. What do I do about that? How do I assert myself? How do I express this? That will happen. If we're working with a client, and I have worked with clients like this, even though they've been through a lot of therapy, even though they're still in therapy, even though they've had a lot of awareness, it's very, very tempting in the moment to just fall back into that passive aggressive pattern, not pay attention to the anger, just distract yourself, and then express the anger through a passive way. So they would have to have these certain markers to look for, like, oh, okay, I think this might be a situation in which my partner actually did something kind of bad to me, not terrible, but a little hurtful. And although I don't feel angry and I don't feel hurt, I know from the past that I might actually be hurt and angry down below. And at least I have to ask the question, what's going on? But that's that marker. That was that thing that me and my therapist have talked about that's happening right now. And unless I pay very close attention, there's a chance that I'll start going down a road that will be very, very bad for all of us. So, there's a lot of things that you have to do. And we're not hearing anything. He's just saying, I'm just not going to do it again. All right, well, let's adjourn there. Tune in next time. I'm going to continue watching if you care to. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.